enchanted carriage glided to a stop, its velvet-lined interior humming with residual magic. You pressed your face to the window, breath fogging the glass, as the frost-kissed courtyard of Beauxbatons Academy came into view. The palace loomed ahead, its spires piercing the pale winter sky, their tips glowing faintly with enchantments that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The stonework shimmered, not with ice, but with some charm that made the entire building look as though it were carved from moonlight. You adjusted the strap of your worn Hogwarts satchel, the leather creaking under your fingers, and felt the weight of being somewhere entirely new. The carriage door opened with a soft chime, and a rush of cold air greeted you, carrying the scent of pine and something sweeter, lavender, perhaps, or enchanted roses. You stepped onto the cobblestones, your Hogwarts boots crunching faintly against the frost. They looked out of place here, scuffed and practical, against the polished elegance of the courtyard. A student approached, her pale blue robes flowing as though caught in a breeze that didn't exist. Her posture was impeccable, her chin tilted just so, and her smile was warm but measured, like she'd practiced it 100 times. Her eyes flicked to your boots, then back to your face, the glance so quick you almost missed it. "Bienvenue," she said, her voice like a melody. "You must be the Hogwarts exchange student. I am Elise, your guide." You nodded, suddenly aware of how your scarf hung unevenly, and how your cloak bore a faint stain from a potions mishap last term. "Thanks," you managed, hoping your voice didn't betray the flutter in your chest. Elise gestured toward the palace, and you followed, your steps echoing in the vast courtyard. The air felt different here, lighter, as though it carried a charm to make breathing easier, or perhaps to make everything feel just a touch more beautiful. The entrance hall was a marvel. Chandeliers floated without chains, their crystals refracting light into rainbows that danced across the marble floor. Tapestries rippled as though stirred by an unseen wind, depicting scenes of witches and wizards weaving spells that seemed to move, stars falling into goblets, roses blooming from wands. A faint hum of magic vibrated through the air, and you realized it wasn't just the palace. It was alive with enchantments, each one layered so seamlessly you couldn't tell where one spell ended and another began. Elise led you up a spiral staircase that seemed to adjust its steps to match your stride. a courtesy you weren't used to from Hogwarts' occasionally mischievous architecture. The palace is particular, she said, glancing over her shoulder. It expects a certain grace. You'll learn. Her tone wasn't unkind, but it carried a hint of challenge, as though she was waiting to see how you'd measure up. Your suite was on the 3rd floor, behind a door carved with delicate vines that bloomed with tiny, glowing flowers when Elise tapped it with her wand. Inside, the room was a study in elegance. A 4-poster bed draped in lavender-scented sheets. A desk that seemed to rearrange its quills and inkwells to suit your gaze. And a window that opened to a snow-dusted orchard below. Floating candles bobbed gently near the ceiling, their flames flickering in time with some unheard rhythm. You set your satchel down, feeling its weight against the polished floor, and crossed to the window. The orchard stretched out, its trees heavy with snow, their branches sparkling as though dusted with starlight. It was beautiful, but it wasn't home. Elise lingered by the door. Dinner is at 7. Wear something appropriate. She hesitated, then added, the dining hall is particular, too. With that, she was gone, her robes whispering against the floor as the door closed behind her. You opened your trunk, pulling out your best robes, clean but plain compared to the silken elegance you'd glimpsed on Elise. You wondered what appropriate meant here, where even the staircases seemed to judge your posture. As you unpacked, the candles dimmed slightly, as though encouraging you to rest. You ignored them, instead rifling through your things for something that might pass muster. A folded letter from your friend at Hogwarts slipped out, her neat handwriting reminding you to observe and adapt. You smiled, tucking it back into your trunk. Hogwarts felt a world away, with its creaking benches and raucous laughter. Here, everything was polished, deliberate, almost too perfect. You glanced at your boots again, their scuffs glaring under the candlelight. Maybe they were a badge of honor, proof you'd survived exploding cauldrons and rogue bludgers. Or maybe they were just boots, and you were overthinking it. The clock on the wall, a delicate thing that ticked with the sound of falling petals, chimed softly. 6 o'clock. You had an hour to prepare for dinner, to step into this world of grace and enchantment and pretend you belonged. You pulled out your robes, smoothing them with a quick charm that felt clumsy compared to the effortless magic you'd seen so far. The palace seemed to hum around you, expectant, waiting to see what you'd do next. You took a deep breath, the lavender scent filling your lungs, and began to change. The courtyard, the chandeliers, Elise's fleeting glance, they all swirled in your mind. This was Beauxbatons, and you were here, standing on the edge of something new. Your boots might not belong, but you did. At least, you hoped you did. The door to your suite closed behind you with a soft click. The enchanted vines on its surface shimmering briefly, as if bidding you farewell. You adjusted the collar of your freshly pressed robes, feeling the weight of Beauxbatons' expectations settle over you like a fine mist. The palace was a labyrinth of elegance, and you were about to step deeper into it. Your Hogwarts boots, still stubbornly scuffed despite a hurried cleaning charm, clacked against the marble floor as you followed the faint glow of floating lanterns down the corridor. They bobbed ahead, guiding you toward the main hall, their light soft but insistent, as though urging you not to dawdle. The corridor itself was a marvel. Its walls were lined with portraits that didn't shout or bicker like those at Hogwarts, but instead murmured in melodic French, their subjects adjusting their silken robes or tilting their heads to study you. One witch, her hair piled high in an elaborate chignon, raised a delicate eyebrow as you passed. Un peu rustique, non? She whispered to her neighbor, a wizard who merely smiled and waved his wand to adjust the frame's angle. You pretended not to hear, but your cheeks warmed. Rustic. That was one way to describe your practical cloak, and the faint scent of broom polish that clung to you. Elise had mentioned a tour before dinner, and you found her waiting at the end of the corridor, her posture as flawless as ever. "You're prompt," she said, her tone approving, but with a hint of surprise, as though she'd expected you to stumble in late. "Come, the palace has much to show you." She turned, her robes flowing like water, and you hurried to keep pace, your boots echoing louder than you'd like. The tour was a whirlwind of beauty and bewilderment. The library was a cathedral of books, its shelves stretching toward a domed ceiling, painted with constellations that shifted as you watched. The books themselves hummed softly, their pages fluttering when you passed too closely, as if eager to share their secrets. "They respond to intent," Elise explained, brushing her fingers against a leather-bound tome that sighed contentedly. "Ask clearly, and they'll open to what you need." You nodded, but your mind was already spinning. At Hogwarts, the books were more likely to snap at your fingers if you weren't careful. The charms classroom was next, a circular room with stained glass windows that cast kaleidoscopic light across the floor. The desks were arranged in a perfect spiral, each one polished to a mirror-like sheen. "Precision is key here," Elise said, demonstrating a wand movement so fluid it looked like a dance. "Every gesture matters, every word." You mimicked her, your wrist stiff and awkward, and the practice quill on the desk merely wobbled instead of floating. Elise's lips twitched, not unkindly. "You'll learn," she said, and you wondered if she meant it as encouragement or pity. The culture shock hit hardest in the smaller details. The staircases, for one, were nothing like Hogwarts' chaotic, shifting steps. Here, they glided into place with a soft bow, as if offering their services. You stepped onto one, and it adjusted its height to match your stride. A gesture so polite, it made you feel like you should thank it. Even the air felt different, laced with enchantments that kept it warm and faintly floral. No matter how high you climbed in the frost-kissed palace, you missed the drafty corridors of Hogwarts, where the wind carried the scent of damp stone and adventure. Your suite, when you returned to change for dinner, was both a refuge and a reminder of how out of place you felt. The lavender-scented sheets were impossibly soft. The floating candles adjusted their glow to your mood, and the window opened to that same snow-covered orchard, now tinged pink by the setting sun. You sat on the edge of the bed, staring at your reflection in a gilded mirror that seemed to hum with approval when you straightened your posture. "You're trying too hard," you muttered to yourself, but the mirror only tilted slightly, as if to say, "And?" Dinner loomed, and with it, the expectation of appropriate attire. You rummaged through your trunk, pulling out a set of robes you'd thought were fancy back at Hogwarts. Here, they looked plain, almost dowdy. You cast a quick charm to smooth the wrinkles, but the fabric still lacked the silken sheen of Elise's robes. The clock chimed, 6:30. Its petal-like ticks louder now, as if impatient. You slipped into your robes, tied your scarf with a knot that felt too tight, and headed for the dining hall. The hall was a vision of mirrored opulence, its walls reflecting the light of 1,000 floating candles. Students glided to their seats, their robes shimmering in shades of blue, silver, and gold. You spotted Elise at a table near the center, surrounded by others who moved with the same effortless grace. She caught your eye and gestured you over, but the walk across the hall felt like a gauntlet. Every step drew glances, polite, curious, but heavy all the same. You sat, grateful for the chair that adjusted itself to your height, and tried to mimic the way the others held their goblets, fingers light and wrists tilted just so. The first course was a soup that smelled of roses and shimmered faintly, as though infused with starlight. You took a tentative sip, expecting something overly sweet, but it was delicate, warm, and strangely comforting. The girl across from you, Amélie, you learned later, watched you over the rim of her goblet. "It's rose-petal bisque," she said, her accent curling around the words. "You like?" You nodded, unsure if you were supposed to compliment the soup or the magic that made it glow. "It's different," you said, and she laughed, a sound like tinkling bells. "You'll find much is different here," she said, and you weren't sure if it was a promise or a warning. The meal continued, each course more elaborate than the last. Quail eggs that sang softly when cracked, bread that melted into bursts of flavor, wine that sparkled without alcohol. You tried to keep up, but your fork felt clumsy, and you were certain you'd used the wrong spoon for the bisque. The students around you chatted in low, musical tones, their laughter restrained but genuine. You felt like a broom in a room full of swans, sturdy but out of place. Yet, as the meal ended and the plates vanished with a graceful flick of someone's wand, Elise leaned over. "You did well," she said quietly. "For a first night." Her smile was small but real, and for the first time, you felt a flicker of hope that you might find your place here, scuffed boots and all. The candles dimmed, signaling the end of dinner, and you stood, the chair gliding back without a sound. The palace hummed around you, its enchantments a constant reminder of where you were. You weren't at Hogwarts anymore, but maybe, just maybe, you could learn to belong in a place where even the staircases bowed. The morning after your first dinner at Beauxbatons, you woke to the gentle chime of your suite's pedal-ticking clock, its sound blending with the faint hum of the palace's enchantments. Sunlight filtered through the window, casting a soft glow over the snow-dusted orchard outside. You rubbed sleep from your eyes, the lavender scent of the sheets lingering as you swung your legs over the bed's edge. Today was your first day of classes, and the thought sent a flutter of nerves through you. Hogwarts had prepared you for many things, dodging rogue spells, outsmarting trick staircases. But Beauxbatons was a different beast, one that demanded grace as much as skill. You dressed carefully, choosing robes that felt slightly less out of place after last night's dinner. Your Hogwarts boots, though, remained stubbornly unpolished. Their scuffs, a quiet rebellion against the palace's perfection. The mirror in your suite tilted approvingly as you straightened your posture, but you caught your reflection grimacing. "Don't overthink it," you muttered, and the mirror seemed to hum in agreement, its frame glowing faintly. The classroom for your first lesson, Enchanted Etiquette, was on the second floor, down a corridor lined with tapestries that whispered compliments in French as you passed. The door opened before you could knock, revealing a room that looked more like a ballroom than a classroom. Crystal chandeliers floated above, their light refracting into soft rainbows across the polished wooden floor. The desks were arranged in a crescent, each one adorned with a single white rose that bloomed and closed in time with some unheard melody. Your classmates, already seated, turned to look as you entered, their gazes polite but piercing. You spotted Elise near the front, her wand resting lightly in her hand, and she gave you a small nod. The professor, Madame Lefebvre, glided in moments later, her silver robes shimmering like liquid moonlight. She was tall, with hair swept into an elegant knot, and her presence seemed to command the room without effort. "Bon matin, mes élèves," she said, her voice clear and melodic. "Today, we refine the art of enchantment through etiquette. Magic is not merely power. It is intention, grace, and harmony." Her eyes swept the room, lingering on you for a fraction longer than the others. "Our guest from Hogwarts, I presume," she said, and you nodded, feeling your face warm. "Bien. Let us begin." The lesson was unlike anything at Hogwarts. Madame Lefebvre demonstrated a charm to summon a teacup, but it wasn't enough to simply cast the spell. The wand had to be lifted at the wrist with a precise flourish, the incantation sung rather than spoken, each syllable rising and falling like an aria. "Accio teacup," you muttered under your breath, mimicking her gesture, but your wand jerked too sharply, and the teacup wobbled across the desk before tipping over with a faint clink. A few students stifled laughter, their hands covering their mouths in a way that was somehow both polite and mortifying. Madame Lefebvre raised a hand, silencing the room. "Precision, not force," she said, her tone firm, but not unkind. She crossed to your desk, her robes whispering against the floor, and adjusted your wrist with a touch so light it barely registered. "Like so," she said, guiding your wand through the motion. Feel the rhythm of the spell. It is a dance, not a duel. You tried again, this time letting the incantation hum in your throat. The teacup floated smoothly, hovering an inch above the desk before settling with a gentle chime. Madame Lefebvre smiled, a rare crack in her poised exterior. "Better," she said. "You have potential. Hogwarts." The rest of the lesson was a blur of delicate wand work and melodic spells. You learned to charm a quill, to write in cursive so fluid it looked like liquid silver, to make a scarf fold itself into intricate patterns, and to summon a mirror that reflected not just your face, but your mood, yours, to your dismay, showed a faint swirl of anxiety. By the time the class ended, your wrist ached from the unfamiliar precision, and your head spun with the effort of keeping up. But there was something exhilarating about it, too. The way each spell felt like a performance, each gesture a brushstroke in a larger masterpiece. The next class, Transfiguration, was no less demanding. The professor, Monsieur Dubois, insisted that every transformation be not only functional, but beautiful. "A teapot must pour," he said, his mustache twitching, "but it must also sing." You watched as your classmates turned quills into roses that bloomed in sync with their breathing, while your own quill sprouted a single, lopsided petal before collapsing into a pile of feathers. Monsieur Dubois chuckled, a sound like rolling thunder. "Bold, if imperfect," he said. "Try again, with elegance." Lunch offered no respite. The dining hall, with its mirrored walls and floating candles, was as formal as dinner, and you were hyper-aware of every movement. You tried to mimic the way your classmates held their forks, their wrists arched like dancers, but your bread crumbled awkwardly, scattering crumbs across the table. Amélie, the girl from last night, leaned over with a conspiratorial smile. "It's not a test," she whispered. "Just eat." Her kindness loosened the knot in your chest, and you managed a laugh, even as you brushed the crumbs away. The afternoon brought charms, where the professor insisted on spells being cast in rhyming couplets. Your attempt at a levitation charm came out more like a limerick, and the feather you were supposed to lift instead spun wildly, knocking over a classmate's inkwell. The room erupted in laughter, and you braced for a reprimand, but the professor merely clapped her hands. "Creativity," she declared. "A bit chaotic, but we can refine it." You weren't sure if she was being generous or just amused. but you took it as a win. By the end of the day, you were exhausted, your mind a jumble of wand flourishes and sung incantations. You returned to your suite, collapsing onto the lavender-scented bed as the floating candles dimmed sympathetically. Your scarf, still slightly singed from a mispronounced charm that had set it smoldering during etiquette, lay crumpled on the desk. You stared at it, half expecting it to lecture you on proper folding techniques. Yet, beneath the exhaustion, there was a spark of something new. Beauxbatons was daunting, its elegance almost suffocating. But it was also beautiful in a way Hogwarts never was. Hogwarts was home, messy, loud, familiar. But Beauxbatons was like stepping into a painting, every detail deliberate and breathtaking. You weren't sure you belonged here, not yet, but you were starting to see the appeal of its rituals, the way magic could be art as much as power. You rolled over, staring out at the orchard, its snow glowing faintly under the moonlight. Tomorrow, you'd try again. Maybe you'd even get the teacup to sing. The mirrored dining hall of Beauxbatons gleamed under the light of 1,000 floating candles, their flames flickering in perfect unison, casting a warm glow across the long, polished tables. You sat near the edge of one, your plate of rose-petal soup steaming faintly before you, its delicate aroma mingling with the subtle lavender scent that seemed to permeate every corner of the palace. The soup shimmered, tiny flecks of gold catching the light, and you hesitated, unsure if you were supposed to sip it directly or wait for some unspoken signal. Your Hogwarts instincts told you to dig in, but the poised silence of the students around you suggested otherwise. You gripped your spoon, its silver handle engraved with delicate vines, and tried to mimic the graceful tilt of your neighbor's wrists. Dinner at Beauxbatons was an event, not a meal. The hall buzzed with quiet conversation, the students' voices low and melodic, their laughter like the chime of crystal. You felt like an outsider, your Hogwarts robes too heavy, your posture too slouched despite your best efforts. The girl to your left, Amélie, sipped her soup with a practiced elegance, her spoon never touching the bowl's edge. Across from you, a boy named Julien adjusted his scarf with a flick of his wand, the fabric folding itself into a perfect knot. You glanced at your own scarf, still faintly singed from yesterday's etiquette mishap, and tucked it under the table. The first few days had been a blur of classes and culture shock, and meals were no less daunting. At Hogwarts, The great hall was a riot of noise, students shouting across tables, house elves popping in with extra treacle tarts, the occasional owl swooping through with a poorly timed letter. Here, everything was deliberate. The plates appeared and vanished with a wave of a wand. The food arranged like art. Tiny quail eggs nestled in edible nests, bread that dissolved into bursts of flavor, goblets of sparkling juice that changed taste with every sip. You'd learned the hard way that using the wrong fork could earn you a raised eyebrow, and you were still trying to figure out which spoon was meant for the soup. You took a cautious sip. The rose petal soup, warm and surprisingly savory, with a hint of sweetness that lingered on your tongue. It was delicious, but you couldn't shake the feeling that you were being watched. You glanced up, catching the eye of a girl with sleek blonde hair and a silver hairpin shaped like a butterfly. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that felt like a test. "You're the Hogwarts student." "Oui?" she said, her voice light but curious. "I'm Claire. You seem very quiet." You swallowed, the soup suddenly heavy in your throat. "Just taking it all in," you said, hoping it sounded intentional rather than awkward. Claire tilted her head, her hairpin catching the candlelight. "It must be so different from your school," she said. "We hear Hogwarts is very direct." "No?" Her tone wasn't unkind, but the word direct felt like a polite way of saying chaotic. You nodded, managing a small smile. "Yeah, we're a bit louder, I guess." To your surprise, Claire laughed, a soft, musical sound that drew the attention of the students around her. "Louder is not always bad," she said, leaning closer. "Tell me, do you really ride brooms through the halls?" The question caught you off guard, and you nearly dropped your spoon. "Not exactly," you said, grinning despite yourself. "But there was this one time with a rogue bludger." You trailed off, unsure if the story would make you sound reckless. But Claire's eyes sparkled with interest. "Go on," she said, and the others at the table leaned in, their curiosity breaking through their polished reserve. You launched into the tale, describing the bludger that had escaped during a Quidditch practice and careened through the charms corridor, knocking over a suit of armor and sending Professor Flitwick diving for cover. At Hogwarts, it was just another Tuesday, but here, it seemed like a legend. Julian chuckled, his scarf now draped artfully over one shoulder. "At Beauxbatons, Our accidents are more contained, he said, gesturing to a nearby table where a student's spilled juice had transformed into a tiny fountain of sparkling droplets, neatly contained by a charm. But I like your story. It's bold. The tension in your shoulders eased, and the conversation flowed more easily after that. Amélie asked about Hogwarts' house system, her brow furrowing when you explained the sorting hat. A hat decides your fate? She said, incredulous. What if it's wrong? You shrugged, thinking of your own sorting, the hat's voice whispering in your ear. It's usually right, you said, though it takes some getting used to. Claire chimed in, asking about the food at Hogwarts, and you described the mountains of roast potatoes and sticky toffee pudding, watching their eyes widen at the lack of edible flowers or singing desserts. As the meal progressed, you felt the weight of their curiosity shift from scrutiny to genuine interest. They weren't mocking your differences. They were fascinated by them. You began to ask questions of your own, learning that Beauxbatons students studied divination by reading the patterns in falling snow, that their Quidditch pitch was enchanted to bloom with roses after every goal. The more you talked, the more you realized that Beauxbatons wasn't just about perfection. It was about a different kind of magic, one that wove beauty into every spell and gesture. The main course arrived, a delicate arrangement of herb-crusted fish and vegetables carved into intricate shapes. You managed to use the correct fork this time, earning a small nod from Amélie. You're learning, she said, her smile warm. You grinned back, feeling a flicker of pride. The dessert was a tiny cake that unfolded like a flower when tapped with a wand, revealing a core of chocolate that tasted like starlight. You fumbled the charm, and your cake bloomed lopsidedly. But Claire clapped her hands. It's still beautiful, she said. And you realized she meant it, as the plates vanished and the candles dimmed, signaling the end of dinner. You stood with the others, your chair gliding back silently. The group lingered, still chatting, and Julianne invited you to join them in the common room later for a game of enchanted chess, where the pieces bowed before capturing each other. It's less violent than your bludgers, he teased, and you laughed, the sound louder than you'd intended, but met with smiles instead of stares. Walking back to your suite, the palace's corridors seemed a little less intimidating. The tapestries still whispered, but their words felt friendlier, and the staircases bowed with a warmth you hadn't noticed before. You weren't one of them, not yet, but for the first time, you felt like you could be. the singed scarf in your pocket, the scuffed boots on your feet. They didn't feel like flaws anymore. They were just part of your story, one that was starting to weave itself into the tapestry of Beauxbatons. The potions classroom at Beauxbatons was a study in elegance, like everything else in the palace. Its high ceilings were adorned with frescoes of swirling mists, each cloud shimmering with the faint glow of bottled starlight. The work tables were carved from pale wood, polished to a mirror-like sheen, and each station was equipped with a delicate silver cauldron that looked more like a piece of art than a tool for brewing. You stood at your assigned table, your Hogwarts satchel slung over the back of a chair that adjusted its height with a soft hum. The air smelled of lavender and crushed herbs, a far cry from the damp, sulphurous tang of Hogwarts dungeons. Your classmates moved with their usual grace, their robes whispering as they gathered ingredients from a cabinet that opened with a melodic chime. Amélie was at the table next to yours, measuring out powdered moonstone with a precision that made you feel clumsy just watching. Julian, across the room, was charming his scales to balance themselves, the weights floating into place with a flick of his wand. You, meanwhile, were still trying to decipher the recipe written in flowing cursive on a piece of parchment that seemed to glow faintly when you touched it. The potion was supposed to be a draught of serenity, meant to calm the mind and make the drinker's aura glow a soft blue. Simple enough, you thought, until you saw the instructions. Stir counterclockwise thrice, then clockwise once, with a wand. Flourish between each turn. Professor Beauxbatons, a wiry man with a penchant for dramatic pauses, glided between the tables, his robes trailing like a comet's tail. Potions, he said, his voice low and resonant, are not merely mixtures. They are symphonies. Each ingredient, each stir, is a note in the melody. Play it poorly, and the result is discord. His eyes landed on you, and he raised an eyebrow. Our Hogwarts guest, I trust you're familiar with the basics? You nodded, though your confidence wavered. Potions at Hogwarts were more about survival, avoiding explosions, dodging Snape's sarcasm. Here, it felt like you were being asked to compose poetry. You began, carefully measuring out the moonstone and adding it to the cauldron, where it dissolved with a soft hiss. So far, so good. The lavender sprigs went in next, their scent intensifying as they melted into the simmering liquid. You stirred, counting carefully, counterclockwise. 1, 2, 3. then flicked your wand as instructed. A puff of blue smoke rose from the cauldron, and you felt a flicker of pride. Maybe you were getting the hang of this. Then came the rose water. The recipe called for a single tear's worth, which sounded poetic, but was maddeningly vague. You tilted the vial, aiming for a tiny drop, but your hand slipped. Hogwarts habits, always a bit too hasty, and a full splash poured in. The cauldron hissed, then bubbled violently, and before you could react, it erupted in a shower of blue petals that scattered across the room like confetti. They floated for a moment, glowing faintly, then drifted to the floor, leaving a trail of shimmering dust. The classroom fell silent. Your face burned, and you braced for a scolding, imagining Snape's sneer if this had happened at Hogwarts. But Professor Vauquelin merely clapped his hands once, the sound sharp and deliberate. "Magnifique," he declared, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Improvisation. A Hogwarts trait. Oui?" He swept his wand, and the petals gathered themselves into a neat pile, transforming into a bouquet of glowing blue roses that he presented to Amélie with a flourish. "For your table, mademoiselle," he said, and she laughed, tucking one behind her ear. The other students giggled, not mockingly, but with a kind of delighted surprise. Julian leaned over, grinning. "That was spectacular," he said. "Do all your potions explode like that?" You managed a sheepish smile. "Only the good ones," you said, and the room erupted in laughter, the sound light and warm. For the first time, you didn't feel like the odd one out. Amélie helped you clean your cauldron, her wand flicking with practiced ease to banish the remaining petals. "It's not so bad," she said, her voice kind. "Last week, I turned my potion into a flock of butterflies by mistake. They sang for an hour before Madame Lefebvre caught them all." She mimicked the professor's stern expression, and you snorted, the tension in your chest unraveling. The rest of the class passed in a blur of shared mishaps. Claire, the girl with the butterfly hairpin, accidentally charmed her potion to smell like chocolate syrup, which drew a crowd of curious students sniffing the air. Julienne's cauldron produced a cloud of mist that formed tiny, dancing figures before dissipating. Each mistake was met with laughter and gentle corrections from Professor Vauquelin, who seemed to view chaos as an opportunity for creativity. "Perfection is dull," he said at one point, winking at you. "A little discord makes the symphony interesting." By the time the class ended, your draft of serenity was closer to a draft of mild confusion, but it glowed a soft blue, and you hadn't caused any more explosions. Amélie invited you to join her and Julien for lunch, and you followed them to the dining hall, feeling lighter than you had since arriving. The mirrored walls reflected your group, and for once, your scuffed boots didn't seem to stand out as much. You sat together, the rose petal soup less intimidating now, and the conversation flowed easily. Stories of Beauxbatons pranks, like the time someone charmed the chandeliers to sing opera, and your own tales of Hogwarts poltergeist, Peeves, wreaking havoc. Later that afternoon, in Charms, you paired with Claire for a spell to make objects dance. Your candlestick wobbled awkwardly, while hers twirled like a ballerina. But when it tripped over your scarf, still singed, still stubborn, she laughed so hard she nearly dropped her wand. "You bring chaos everywhere, don't you?" she said. But her smile was warm, and you found yourself laughing too. The spell went wrong again, this time sending both candlesticks into a wild jig that knocked over a stack of books, and the professor merely sighed, muttering something about Hogwarts energy. That evening, in the common room, you joined Julienne's enchanted chess game, the pieces bowing politely before lunging at each other. Your knight, true to form, charged too aggressively and toppled a pawn, causing a minor uproar on the board. "You play like you brew," Julien teased, resetting the pieces with a wave of his wand. But he leaned closer, showing you how to charm the pieces to move more gracefully. And you spent hours laughing over missed moves and shared stories as you walked back to your suite. The palace's corridors felt warmer, the tapestry's whispers softer. Your potion mishap had been a disaster, but it had also been a bridge, connecting you to these students who were starting to feel less like strangers. Your scarf, singed and crumpled, hung loosely around your neck, and for the first time, you didn't mind its imperfections. They were part of you, just like the chaos you brought to Beauxbatons. And maybe, just maybe, that chaos was starting to feel like magic. The Beauxbatons palace seemed to hum with a quieter magic in the late afternoon, its enchantments softening as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the frost-kissed grounds. You'd slipped away after a particularly exhausting charms lesson, where your attempt at a levitation spell had sent a feather spiraling into the chandelier, much to the amusement of your classmates. The laughter had been kind, but you craved a moment to breathe, to find a corner of this glittering world that didn't demand perfection. Your Hogwarts boots crunched against the gravel path as you stepped out of the palace. Your scarf, still faintly singed from that etiquette mishap, tucked loosely around your neck. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of snow and enchanted roses, and you felt the weight of the past week begin to lift. The palace grounds were vast, a tapestry of manicured gardens and wilder spaces that seemed to shift subtly under the influence of magic. You wandered past a grove of silver birches, their branches swaying gently despite the still air, as if whispering secrets to one another. The path led you to the Rose Labyrinth, a sprawling maze of hedges that glowed faintly with a golden light, their leaves rustling with echoes of memories. You hesitated at the entrance, a tall archway woven with climbing roses that bloomed and closed as you approached. A plaque at the base read, in elegant script, Les souvenirs chantent ici. The memories sing here. Intrigued, you stepped inside. The labyrinth was a world unto itself. The hedges towered above you, their leaves shimmering with a soft luminescence that lit your way. As you walked, the air grew warmer, and faint whispers brushed against your ears, fragments of laughter, snippets of songs, the murmur of voices long gone. You reached out, your fingers grazing a rose, and a memory, not your own, flickered in your mind. A girl in pale blue robes, twirling under starlight, her laughter bright and fleeting. You pulled your hand back, heart racing. The labyrinth wasn't just beautiful, it was alive, holding the echoes of those who had walked its paths before. You wandered deeper, the paths twisting and turning, each corner revealing something new. A fountain that sang in a language you didn't recognize. A bench that adjusted its shape to cradle you as you paused to rest. The memories grew stronger the further you went, some joyful, some tinged with sorrow. A boy's voice, promising to meet someone at midnight. A whispered argument that faded into silence. A burst of laughter from a group of friends planning a prank. You wondered if your own presence would leave an echo here. If years from now, someone would brush a rose and hear your footsteps, your quiet thoughts. The labyrinth eventually opened to a small clearing by a lake, its surface so still it reflected the snow-dusted mountains like a mirror. Tiny boats, no bigger than your hand, bobbed along the shore, each one glowing with a soft light. You knelt to examine one, its delicate frame carved with runes that pulsed faintly. A slip of parchment rested inside, inscribed with elegant handwriting. Pour mon cœur, toujours. You realized these were messages left by students to float across the lake, carrying wishes or secrets or love. The idea was so Beauxbatons, poetic, delicate, a spell woven into something as simple as a paper boat. You sat by the lake, the cold seeping through your robes, but not unpleasantly. The silence was different here, not heavy, but inviting, as if the lake itself were listening. You pulled a scrap of parchment from your satchel, one you'd used to jot down notes in potions, and hesitated. What would you write? You weren't sure who it was for. Your friends back at Hogwarts, your new friends here, or maybe just yourself. The quill in your hand trembled slightly, the ink glowing faintly as you wrote, "I'm here, and I'm trying." It felt small, almost silly, but true. You folded the parchment into a boat, mimicking the shape of the others, and set it on the water with a whispered charm. It glowed softly, drifting out to join the others, its light mingling with theirs until you couldn't tell it apart. The act felt significant, though you couldn't say why. Maybe it was the quiet of the moment, or the way the lake accepted your offering without judgment. You leaned back, staring at the sky, now streaked with pink and gold as dusk settled over the Pyrenees. The palace loomed in the distance, its spires catching the last of the sunlight. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a place you had to conquer. It was just a place, beautiful and strange, and you were part of it. If only for a little while. You lingered by the lake until the air grew sharp, the first stars appearing overhead. The boats glowed brighter now, their lights dancing on the water, and you felt a pang of something you couldn't name. Homesickness, maybe, but softer, mixed with a quiet pride. You'd survived a week at Beauxbatons, with its singing spells and bowing staircases, and you'd left a mark, however small, in this lake of glowing wishes. As you retraced your steps through the labyrinth, the memories seemed to hum more gently, as if acknowledging your presence. A rose brushed your sleeve, and you caught a fleeting image of yourself, standing by the lake, your boat drifting away. The labyrinth was already weaving you into its story. You emerged from the maze as the palace bells chimed, their sound like falling petals, calling students to dinner. Your boots crunched against the gravel, and you smiled at their familiar sound. They didn't belong here, not quite, but they carried you forward, through the frost-kissed grounds, and back to the palace that was starting to feel less like a dream, and more like a place you could understand. The dining hall awaited, with its mirrored walls, and curious classmates. But for now, you carried the lake's quiet with you. A small piece of Beauxbatons that felt like yours. Your scarf fluttered in the evening breeze, its singed edge catching the light, and you let it hang loose. A reminder that imperfections could be part of the magic, too. The Beauxbatons palace seemed to shimmer with a new energy as the midwinter festival drew near, its halls buzzing with a quiet excitement that felt like magic itself was holding its breath. The air carried a faint sparkle, as if the enchantments woven into the walls were preparing for something grand. You noticed it first in the dining hall, where the floating candles burned brighter, their flames casting intricate patterns of snowflakes across the mirrored walls. The students, usually so composed, whispered animatedly over their rose petal soups, their voices rising and falling like a melody. The word festival was on everyone's lips, and you felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. You'd heard about the Midwinter Festival, a celebration of magic, beauty, and unity, but you weren't sure what it meant for an outsider like you, with your scuffed Hogwarts boots and singed scarf. Your days had settled into a rhythm of sorts, a delicate dance between adapting to Beauxbatons' elegance and holding on to your own rough edges. Classes were still a challenge, with their sung spells and precise wand work, but you'd earned a few smiles from professors and classmates alike, especially after your potion exploded into a shower of blue petals. Yet the festival loomed like a test you hadn't studied for. In the common room, you overheard Amélie and Claire discussing enchanted gowns, their hands sketching designs in the air that sparkled briefly before fading. The ball is the heart of the festival, Amélie explained when she caught you listening, her eyes bright. Everyone wears something special. You'll see. The idea of a ball made your stomach twist. At Hogwarts, feasts were loud and chaotic, with students piling plates high and laughing over spilled pumpkin juice. A ball, with its promise of dancing and enchanted attire, felt like stepping into a fairy tale, one where you might trip over your own feet. You tried to imagine yourself in a shimmering gown, but the image felt wrong, like borrowing someone else's wand. I'm not sure I'm the gown type, you admitted to Amélie one afternoon, as you sat in the library, surrounded by books that hummed softly when you touched them. She looked up from her notes, her quill pausing mid-flourish. "Nonsense," she said, her accent softening the word. "Everyone sparkles differently. You don't need a gown to shine." Her confidence was infectious, but doubt lingered. You thought of your trunk, filled with practical robes, and that one slightly fancier set you'd worn to dinner, now faintly wrinkled despite your best charms. Nothing in there screamed festival-worthy. The preparations for the festival were everywhere. In the corridors, students practiced charms to make their robes shimmer or change color with the light. The staircases, ever polite, now adorned themselves with garlands of enchanted snowflakes that never melted. Even the rose labyrinth, where you'd taken to wandering when you needed a moment alone, seemed to glow brighter, its memories singing with anticipation. You passed a group of students by the lake, charming their paper boats to glow in intricate patterns, practice for the festival's tradition of floating wishes. You hadn't added another boat since your first, but the sight of theirs, twinkling like stars on the water, made you want to try again. In enchanted etiquette, Madame Lefebvre announced that the week's lessons would focus on dance. The midwinter ball is a symphony of movement, she said, her silver robes catching the light as she demonstrated a waltz that seemed to float an inch above the floor. Your steps must sing, just like your spells. The class paired off, and you found yourself with Julian, whose easy grin made the prospect of dancing slightly less terrifying. "Don't worry," he whispered as you fumbled the first step, your boots clumping awkwardly. "It's just a charm with your feet." His wand flicked, and a faint melody hummed around you, guiding your movements. You stumbled, but he caught your arm, laughing. "Hogwarts boldness, Beauxbatons grace," he said. "We'll find a balance." The lessons were grueling, each step requiring a precision you weren't used to. At Hogwarts, dancing was reserved for rare occasions, like the Yule Ball, and even then, it was more enthusiasm than elegance. Here, every turn was a performance, every gesture a spell. Your muscles ached by the end of the day. But there was a thrill in it, too. The way the music seemed to weave through your bones, the way Julienne's laughter made your mistakes feel lighter. Outside of class, the palace was transforming. The courtyard, once frost-kissed and quiet, now sparkled with enchanted lanterns that floated like fireflies. The dining hall's tables were draped in silks that shifted colors with the time of day, and the food grew even more elaborate. Pastries that unfolded into edible flowers, drinks that sang softly when you raised the glass. You overheard Claire talking about her gown, a creation of starlight and silk that would bloom during the first dance. "What about you?" she asked, catching you off guard as you sat together in the common room, a chessboard between you. Have you chosen something yet? You hesitated, fingering the singed edge of your scarf. I don't know, you admitted. I'm not sure I belong at a ball like this. Claire tilted her head, her butterfly hairpin glinting. You belong because you're here, she said simply. Wear what feels like you. The magic will do the rest. Her words stayed with you, echoing as you returned to your suite that night. The lavender-scented sheets welcoming you like an old friend. You opened your trunk, staring at the robes inside. There was one set, a deep midnight blue that you'd overlooked before, a gift from your parents before you left for Beauxbatons, meant for special occasions. You'd dismissed it as too fancy. But now, under the soft glow of the floating candles, it looked different. You draped it over the chair, and the mirror hummed approvingly, its frame shimmering. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe you didn't need to be someone else to shine. The festival was 2 days away, and the palace seemed to pulse with anticipation. You joined Amélie and Julien in the Rose Labyrinth one evening, helping them charm lanterns to float above the paths, their light casting intricate shadows. The festival is about more than the ball, Amélie said, her wand tracing a pattern that made her lantern glow like a tiny moon. It's about being part of something bigger. You'll feel it. You nodded, watching your own lantern wobble before steadying, its light softer but steady. You weren't sure if you'd sparkle, but you were starting to want to try. That night, you lay in bed, the orchard outside your window glowing under a crescent moon. The palace hummed around you, its enchantments a quiet promise of what was to come. You thought of Hogwarts, its messy warmth, and then of Beauxbatons, its delicate magic. You weren't sure where you fit, but for the first time, you felt like you could belong to both. The midnight blue robes hung in the corner, waiting, and you fell asleep with a small, hopeful smile, the festival's promise tugging at your heart. The night of the Midwinter Festival arrived with a hush that felt like the palace itself was holding its breath. The air shimmered with anticipation, laced with enchantments that made your skin tingle as you stepped out of your suite, clad in the midnight blue robes you'd unearthed from your trunk. The fabric was heavier than the silks worn by your Beauxbatons classmates, but it draped over you with a quiet elegance, its deep hue catching the candlelight in a way that felt almost magical. You'd charmed it yourself, a simple spell to make the edges shimmer faintly, a nod to the festival's sparkle without losing the sturdy familiarity of Hogwarts. Your boots, still scuffed despite a last-minute polishing charm, peeked out beneath the hem, and your singed scarf was tucked away in your pocket, a secret talisman of your journey. The corridor leading to the ballroom was transformed. The usual floating lanterns had been replaced by cascading streams of crystal snowflakes, each one glowing with a icy light that danced across the marble floor. The tapestries whispered excitedly, their woven figures twirling in silent celebration. You passed a group of students, their gowns blooming with enchanted flowers or sparkling like starlight, and felt a pang of self-consciousness. But Amelie's words echoed in your mind. Everyone sparkles differently, and you straightened your shoulders, letting the weight of your robes ground you. The ballroom doors were massive, carved with scenes of winter feasts and swirling dancers, and they swung open soundlessly as you approached. The sight beyond stole your breath. The room was vast, its ceiling a dome of enchanted glass that revealed a sky full of stars. Though you swore you could see snow falling within the glass itself, never touching the floor, chandeliers floated above, their crystals refracting light into rainbows that shimmered across the polished parquet. The walls were draped in silks that shifted from silver to deep blue, mirroring the night outside. And at the center of the room, a fountain bubbled with liquid starlight, its droplets rising to join the chandeliers. Students filled the space, their gowns and robes a kaleidoscope of color and magic. Claire's dress bloomed with tiny, glowing roses that opened and closed with her movements, while Julianne's robes sparkled with threads that wove themselves into new patterns each time he turned. Amélie, radiant in pale gold, waved you over from across the room, her smile bright enough to rival the chandeliers. "You came," she called, weaving through the crowd with a grace you envied. "And you look. You." She meant it as a compliment, and you felt a warmth spread through you, easing the knot in your chest. The music began, a swelling melody played by invisible instruments, its notes weaving through the air like a spell. It wasn't the raucous bagpipes or cheerful lutes of Hogwarts dances. This was delicate, layered, pulling you into its rhythm like a tide. Madame Lefebvre, resplendent in silver robes that seemed to glow from within, took the floor first, demonstrating a waltz that floated an inch above the ground. The students followed, pairing off with practiced ease, their steps so fluid It looked like they were gliding on ice. You hesitated, your boots feeling heavier than ever. But Julien appeared at your side, his grin as disarming as always. "Shall we?" he asked, offering his hand. You took it, heart pounding. "I'm not great at this," you warned, remembering the awkward steps from etiquette class. He laughed, guiding you into the flow of dancers. "No one's watching," he said, though you could feel the eyes of the room, curious and kind. Your first steps were clumsy, your boots clomping against the floor, but Julian's hand was steady, and the music seemed to guide you, softening your movements. You stumbled once, nearly stepping on his toes, but he twirled you with a flourish that made the misstep look intentional. "Hogwarts boldness," he whispered, and you laughed, the sound swallowed by the music. As the dance continued, you found a rhythm. It wasn't perfect. Your turns were too sharp, your posture not quite as elegant as Amelie's, but it felt right. The midnight blue robes caught the light, their shimmer blending with the crystal snowflakes above. And for the first time, you didn't feel like an outsider. You were just another dancer, part of the swirling, sparkling whole. Claire joined you for the next dance, her roses brushing against your robes as she taught you a quicker step, her laughter infectious when you tripped and caught yourself with a hasty levitation charm. "Very resourceful," she teased, and you grinned, letting the music carry you. The night unfolded in a blur of color and sound. You danced with Amélie, who showed you how to charm your robes to ripple like water, and with a shy boy named Etienne, whose glasses fogged up from nerves, but whose steps were flawless. Between dances, you sipped sparkling juice that tasted of moonlight and berries, and nibbled on pastries that unfolded into tiny, edible constellations. The fountain at the center of the room began to release glowing orbs that floated above the dancers, each one bursting into a shower of light when tapped with a wand. You tried it, your spell clumsy but effective, and the crowd cheered as golden sparks rained down, catching in your hair. As the night wore on, the music slowed, and the dancers gathered in a circle for the festival's final tradition, the release of wishes. Tiny paper boats, like the ones you'd seen at the lake, appeared in everyone's hands, glowing with personal enchantments. You pulled out your scarf, the singed one you'd kept hidden, and tore off a small piece, folding it into a boat with a charm you'd practiced in secret. You didn't write a wish this time. Just let the fabric carry whatever hope you felt in that moment. When the circle released their boats, they floated upward, joining the crystal snowflakes, their lights merging into a constellation that pulsed with the heartbeat of the room. You stood there, breathless, your robes shimmering faintly, your boots scuffed but steady. For that moment, you weren't the Hogwarts exchange student, the one with the clumsy steps and the singed scarf. You were just a student, part of Beauxbatons, part of this night. The music swelled one last time, and you closed your eyes, letting it wash over you. The magic of the ball weaving itself into your memory like a rose in the labyrinth. When the final note faded, the crowd lingered, reluctant to break the spell. Amélie linked her arm through yours, her gold gown glowing softly. "You sparkled," she said, and you smiled, feeling the truth of it. The ballroom doors opened to the frosty night, and you stepped out with the others, the cold air sharp but welcome. The palace glowed behind you, its spires reaching for the stars, and you knew you'd carry this night with you, a piece of Beauxbatons that was yours forever. The final day at Beauxbatons dawned with a quiet that felt different from the usual hum of the palace's enchantments. The frost-kissed courtyard sparkled under a pale morning sun, and the air carried a bittersweet chill, as if the grounds themselves knew you were leaving. Your time as an exchange student had flown by, each day a delicate balance of awe and adaptation. And now, as you packed your trunk in the lavender-scented suite, a strange sadness settled in your chest. It wasn't the sharp ache of homesickness you'd felt when you first arrived, but something softer, like the weight of a memory you weren't ready to let go. The room seemed to sense your mood. The floating candles burned low, their flames flickering gently, and the mirror tilted as if to offer a reassuring glance. Your midnight blue robes, worn so proudly at the midwinter ball, lay folded neatly on the bed, their faint shimmer catching the light. Your Hogwarts boots, still scuffed despite your best efforts, sat by the door, a reminder of where you'd come from and where you were going. The singed scarf, your constant companion through mishaps and triumphs, was tucked into your satchel, its frayed edge a testament to your journey. You ran your fingers over it, smiling at the memory of blue petals exploding in potions, of dancing under crystal snowflakes, of paper boats glowing on the lake. The palace was quieter today, the usual bustle of students softened by the end of the exchange term. You wandered the corridors one last time, the tapestries, whispering farewells in melodic French. The staircases bowed as you passed, their movements slower, almost reluctant. You paused by a window overlooking the rose labyrinth, its hedges glowing faintly in the morning light. You thought of the night you'd sat by the lake, sending your tiny boat to join the others, and wondered if it was still out there, carrying your quiet wish. I'm here, and I'm trying. Your final meeting was with Madame Delamere, the headmistress, whose office was a marvel of elegance and warmth. The room was circular, its walls lined with shelves that held books and trinkets that hummed with magic. A fire burned in a hearth carved with dancing flames that never consumed the wood, and a window opened to the snow-dusted orchard, now tinged gold by the rising sun. Madame Delamere stood as you entered, her robes a cascade of silver and blue, her smile both regal and kind. "You have done well here," she said, her voice like a melody. "Beauxbatons is not an easy place to step into, yet you have left your mark." You shifted, unsure how to respond. "I made a lot of mistakes," you admitted, thinking of the singed scarf, the lopsided candlestick, the potion that had turned into a floral explosion. She laughed, a sound like chiming bells. "Mistakes are how we learn," she said. "And you, I think, have learned much." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded slip of parchment, sealed with a wax emblem shaped like a rose. She handed it to you, her fingers brushing yours lightly. "A small gift," she said. "Open it when you're ready." You thanked her, tucking the parchment into your satchel, and she gestured to a table where a basket waited, filled with enchanted pastries that shimmered faintly, their surfaces dusted with sugar that sparkled like snow. "For your journey," she said. "They'll keep, and they'll remind you of us." You smiled, the weight of the basket grounding you, its contents a piece of Beauxbatons you could carry home. Outside, in the courtyard, your friends were waiting. Amélie, Claire, and Julienne stood near the enchanted carriage that would take you back to Hogwarts, their robes fluttering in the breeze. Amélie hugged you first, her gold gown from the ball replaced by her usual pale blue, but her warmth unchanged. "Write to us," she said, pressing a tiny, glowing charm into your hand, a miniature rose that pulsed with light. "It'll find me, wherever you are." Claire, her butterfly hairpin glinting, hugged you next, her laugh soft. "You brought chaos, and we loved it," she said, and you grinned. remembering the dancing candlestick and the chess pieces that had staged a minor revolt. Julianne, ever the joker, bowed dramatically before pulling you into a quick embrace. Next time, we'll teach you to waltz properly, he teased, and you laughed, promising to practice. The carriage door opened with a soft chime, and you climbed inside. The velvet interior as plush as the day you arrived. Your friends waved as the carriage lifted off, their figures growing smaller against the backdrop of the palace's glowing spires. You leaned out the window, the cold air sharp against your face, and watched as Beauxbatons receded, its beauty both distant and vivid. Like a dream you could still feel, alone in the carriage. You pulled out the parchment from Madame Delamere. The wax seal broke with a soft crack, and you unfolded it to reveal her elegant script. The world is vast. Our doors, too. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made your throat tighten. Beauxbatons had been a challenge, a place where you'd felt out of place, yet found a way to belong. Its doors, like its magic, were open, not just to elegance, but to you, with your scuffed boots and bold mistakes. The carriage hummed along, the Pyrenees fading into the horizon, and you tucked the parchment away, next to the singed scarf. The pastries in the basket glowed faintly, their scent a mix of sugar and enchantment. And you chose one, biting into its crisp layers. It tasted of roses and starlight. A final gift from a place that had changed you in ways you were only beginning to understand. You leaned back, the sadness still there, but sweet now, like the aftertaste of the pastry. Beauxbatons was behind you, but its magic was yours to keep, woven into the person you were becoming. The enchanted carriage touched down in the familiar sprawl of Hogwarts grounds with a gentle thud, the jolt pulling you from a half-dream of glowing boats and crystal snowflakes. The air was sharper here, carrying the earthy scent of damp stone and pine, a stark contrast to the lavender-laced breeze of Beauxbatons. You stepped out, your scuffed Hogwarts boots crunching against the frost-dusted grass, and felt a rush of warmth at the sight of the castle's jagged silhouette against the twilight sky. Its towers loomed, sturdy and unpolished, their windows flickering with the chaotic glow of torchlight. Home. Yet, as you slung your satchel over your shoulder, the weight of the Beauxbatons basket in your hand reminded you that you weren't quite the same person who had left. The great hall was a riot of noise when you entered, a stark contrast to the mirrored elegance of Beauxbatons dining hall, students shouted across tables, house elves darted between benches with platters of roast potatoes and treacle tarts, and an owl swooped low, dropping a letter into a bowl of mashed peas to a chorus of groans and laughter. You hesitated at the threshold, your midnight blue robes still faintly shimmering from the charm you'd cast for the midwinter ball, drawing curious glances from your housemates. Back from the fancy palace, eh? Called a familiar voice, and you grinned as your friend from Gryffindor waved you over, her plate piled high with food that didn't sing or bloom. You slid onto the bench, the wood creaking under you, and set the Beauxbatons basket down. Brought something, you said, opening it to reveal the enchanted pastries, their surfaces sparkling like fresh snow. Your friends leaned in, eyes wide as the pastries unfolded into edible flowers, their rose and starlight flavor drawing gasps and delighted murmurs. Blimey, said your friend, biting into one. You've gone all posh on us. You laughed, but the word posh didn't feel quite right. Beauxbatons hadn't made you someone else. It had added to you, like a new layer of magic woven into your core. The days that followed were a whirlwind of catching up. Hogwarts was louder, messier, gloriously chaotic. The staircases shifted without warning, sometimes mid-step, and the portraits bickered openly. None of the polite whispering of Beauxbatons tapestries. In potions, Snape's sneer was as sharp as ever, and your cauldron bubbled ominously, but you stirred with a steadier hand, the memory of Professor Vauquelin's symphony guiding your movements. Your draught of peace didn't explode, and when it glowed a soft blue, you caught yourself humming the incantation under your breath. A Beauxbatons habit that felt oddly right. In charms, you flicked your wand with a touch more flourish, the motion earning a raised eyebrow from Professor Flitwick. Someone's been practicing, he said, and you smiled, thinking of Madame Lefebvre's lessons in precision. Your levitation charm lifted a feather smoothly. No wild spirals this time, and your classmates clapped, half mocking, half impressed. You didn't tell them about the hours spent mimicking Julian's wrist movements, or the way Claire's laughter had made your mistakes feel lighter. Some things were yours to keep, like the silk ribbon you'd tied around your wand, a pale blue strip Amélie had given you as a parting gift. It fluttered faintly as you cast, a quiet reminder of the palace. You noticed the changes in yourself in small moments. You walked a little straighter, your shoulders squared in a way that felt natural now, not forced. Your voice softened when you spoke, the Beauxbatons cadence lingering in your words, though you still laughed too loudly, earning grins from your friends. In the common room, you found yourself charming a quill to write in cursive, the ink flowing like liquid silver. And when a first year asked how you did it, you taught them with a patience you hadn't known you had. "It's like a dance," you said, echoing Madame Lefebvre, and they nodded, wide-eyed. One evening, you slipped away to the lake, Hogwarts Lake, not Beauxbatons, its surface rippling under a crescent moon. It wasn't as still or enchanted as the one in the Pyrenees, but it was familiar, its dark waters reflecting the castle's lights. You pulled out the singed scarf, its frayed edge soft under your fingers, and thought of the paper boat you'd sent drifting with your wish. I'm here, and I'm trying. You hadn't realized then how much that wish would mean. You'd tried, and you'd grown, not into someone new, but into a version of yourself that carried both Hogwarts' boldness and Beauxbatons' grace. You wrote a letter to Amélie that night, your quill scratching across parchment as the common room fire crackled. You told her about the great hall's chaos, the way your potion had finally worked, the ribbon on your wand that made you think of her. You charmed the letter to glow faintly, like the boats on the lake, and sent it off with an owl, watching it vanish into the starry sky. The reply came a week later, a delicate parchment sealed with a rose emblem, filled with Amélie's looping script, and news of Beauxbatons, Julien's latest chess disaster, Claire's new hairpin shaped like a star. At the bottom, she'd written, "You left a spark here. Come back someday." Hogwarts felt like yours again, its messiness a comfort, but you carried Beauxbatons with you in quiet ways. The ribbon on your wand, the way you tilted your wrist when casting, the memory of a ballroom where you danced under crystal snowflakes. They were part of you now, woven into your magic like threads in a tapestry. Your spell work had a new confidence, a grace you hadn't expected. And when you caught your reflection in a window, you saw someone who belonged to both worlds, the sturdy, chaotic heart of Hogwarts and the shimmering elegance of Beauxbatons. As you walked to class one morning, your boots crunching against the snow, you pulled Madame Delamere's parchment from your satchel, its words worn from reading. "The world is vast. Our doors, too." You tucked it back, smiling. The world was vast, and you were ready to meet it, not as an exchange student, but as yourself, changed in quiet, beautiful ways.